You're standing in the beauty aisle, fluorescent lights overhead, a shelf full of creams, serums, cleansers, everything promising glow, hydration, renewal. You pick up one moisturizer. It says cruelty-free in clean minimalist lettering. Right next to it is another one, also labeled cruelty-free with a little bunny logo stamped on the front. The first one is $18. The second is $34. Both claim to be ethical, kind, and safe. So you stand there wondering, what's the difference? Here's where it gets interesting. What if I told you that in the United States, the term cruelty-free has no legal definition? Pause there. No federal standard, no universal rulebook, no regulatory body defining exactly what that label must mean. If it's not legally defined, who decides? The brand? A certification company? A marketing team? And more importantly, what is it actually telling you about what happened before the product landed on the shelf? Today, we're pulling back the curtain. We'll explore what animal testing really looks like, historically and today. We'll unpack the legal gray areas around cruelty-free claims. By the end, you'll know how to tell genuine ethical transparency from clever marketing language. Because conscious living isn't about reacting emotionally to a label, it's about understanding what the label truly means. Hello, beautiful listeners, and welcome back to Green Earth Essentials. I'm your host, Michelle Jackson. If you're new here, this is the space where we explore holistic wellness, sustainability, plant-based living, natural beauty, and the deeper layers of what it truly means to live consciously in a modern world. Wellness isn't just about what we put on our skin or in our bodies. It's also about the systems behind those products, the ethics, the science, the transparency, the impact. On this show, we look at the full picture. Today's topic sits right at that intersection: beauty, science, ethics, and consumer awareness. Cruelty-free is a phrase that sounds simple, compassionate, clear, but when you look closer, it becomes much more complex. In this episode, we'll unpack what animal testing actually involves, why the term cruelty-free isn't as straightforward as it seems, and how you can evaluate these claims confidently without relying on guesswork or marketing buzzwords. By the end, you'll know what to look for, the right questions to ask, and how to make informed decisions that align with your values. Conscious consumerism isn't about perfection, it's about clarity, and clarity is empowering. So let's start with the foundation. What is animal testing really? At its core, Animal testing in the cosmetics and personal care industry has historically meant using animals to assess the safety of ingredients or finished products before approval for human use. That's the clinical definition. For much of the 20th century, regulatory agencies required safety data. If a company wanted to sell a new chemical ingredient, whether for skincare, shampoo, or makeup, they had to demonstrate that it wouldn't cause serious harm to consumers. Before modern lab technologies existed, the only biological models available were animals. Some of the most common traditional methods included skin irritation tests, where a substance was applied to shaved skin to observe redness, swelling, or inflammation. There were also eye irritation tests, often associated with what's called the Dray's test, where small amounts of a substance were placed in the eyes of rabbits to measure irritation. Acute toxicity tests involved giving animals varying doses of a substance to determine what level caused harm. The goal was to establish safety thresholds. The animals most commonly used in cosmetic-related research have historically been rabbits, mice, rats, and guinea pigs. Rabbits were frequently chosen for eye and skin studies because they're relatively docile and have large eyes, which made observation easier. None of this is comfortable to talk about, but here's the important nuance. Animal testing did not begin as an act of intentional cruelty. It emerged from a public health framework. In the early 1900s, there were real tragedies caused by unregulated products, contaminated cosmetics, improperly tested chemicals, toxic formulations. Governments responded by strengthening safety laws. The intention was to prevent human injury and death. In that era, animal testing was seen as the most scientifically responsible option available. That context matters. It doesn't erase the ethical concerns, but it explains the origin. The central tension has always been this: how do we protect human health while minimizing harm to other living beings? For decades, animal testing was considered the best available method for predicting how a substance might affect the human body. But science does not stand still, and this is where the conversation shifts. Because over the last few decades, something significant has happened. The tools have changed. The technology has changed. Our understanding of biology has changed. Science has evolved. Now, here's where the story gets interesting. While the public conversation around animal testing often feels stuck in the past, the science itself has been moving forward. One of the biggest advances is something called in vitro testing. In vitro simply means in glass. Instead of testing on a whole animal, Researchers use human cells grown in laboratory environments. These can be skin cells, liver cells, corneal cells, real human biological material cultivated under controlled conditions. Why does that matter? If you're testing how a substance affects human skin, using actual human skin cells gives you data that's directly relevant to human biology. You remove the species gap. Rabbits are not tiny humans. Mice metabolize chemicals differently than we do. In many cases, human cell models produce more accurate safety predictions. Then there are reconstructed human skin models. These are lab grown three-dimensional layers that mimic the structure of real epidermis. Companies can apply ingredients to this created tissue and measure irritation, absorption rates, and inflammatory responses without involving animals at all. And it gets even more sophisticated. There's something called in silico modeling. In silico refers to computer based simulations. Researchers use advanced software to model how a chemical behaves in biological systems. They analyze molecular structure, predict toxicity pathways, and simulate how the body might process a substance, all digitally. This isn't science fiction, it's computational toxicology, and it's accelerating quickly because artificial intelligence and machine learning can analyze enormous chemical data sets far faster than traditional lab methods. On top of that, we now have high throughput screening techniques. These systems can evaluate thousands of compounds rapidly using automated cell-based assays. Instead of running one experiment at a time on one group of animals, scientists can analyze broad patterns of biological response across many substances simultaneously. Here's the part that surprises many people. These alternative methods are often faster. They're frequently more cost effective. In many cases, they're also more predictive of human outcomes. That's a crucial point. Animal testing was once considered the best available tool, but in modern toxicology, the goal isn't simply to replace animals for ethical reasons. The aim is to improve scientific accuracy. Better science and better ethics can align. That doesn't mean animal testing has disappeared entirely in every regulatory context, but the direction of innovation is clear. The scientific community has been actively developing and validating alternatives for years. So now we arrive at an interesting crossroads. If advanced non animal methods exist and are improving, what does it actually mean when a brand says cruelty free? That's where the legal and marketing complexity begins. Now we step into the gray zone. Here's the central issue. In the United States, there is no single federal legal definition of the term cruelty-free for cosmetics. There's no standardized government criteria a brand must meet before putting those words on a label. Unlike terms such as organic, which are regulated under specific agricultural standards, cruelty-free is largely a marketing claim unless it's backed by third-party certification. So, what does that look like in practice? Brands can define it themselves. One company might use cruelty free to mean they do not test the finished product on animals. Another might include ingredient testing in that definition. A different brand might say they don't test, but their ingredient suppliers may have conducted animal testing at some point during the ingredient's development history. Then there's the question of third-party testing. A company might say we don't test on animals, but if a regulatory authority requires testing before a product can be sold in a specific market, that testing could be conducted by an external lab or government body. Technically, the company didn't run the test, but the product was still tested, so the language becomes very careful. This is where consumers understandably feel confused. There's also the ingredient level distinction. Many cosmetic ingredients were originally developed decades ago, when animal testing was more common. Even if a brand doesn't conduct new testing, some ingredients in the formula may have historic animal data attached to them. Does cruelty-free mean never tested in history, or does it mean no new testing conducted by this company? Different brands answer that differently. And then we have the international layer. For many years, mainland China required certain imported cosmetics to undergo animal testing before being sold in physical retail stores. That created a major ethical crossroads for brands. Enter the market and comply with testing requirements, or stay out and maintain cruelty-free status. In recent years, China has updated its regulations. Many general cosmetics, like shampoo or basic skincare, can now be sold without mandatory pre-market animal testing if companies meet specific safety documentation requirements. However, certain categories, often referred to as special cosmetics, may still face additional regulatory scrutiny. The details matter. The category matters. The paperwork matters. Which means the question isn't as simple as do they sell in China? It becomes under what regulatory pathway are they selling, and what documentation supports that pathway. That level of nuance rarely fits on a label. And this brings us to the core truth. The words cruelty-free on their own are not enough information. They're a starting point, not a conclusion. Without transparency, verification, and an understanding of the supply chain and regulatory context, the label doesn't tell the full story. So, how do you separate a self-defined marketing claim from a verified ethical commitment? That's where certifications enter the conversation and where things start to become clearer. This is where third-party certification changes the game. When a term isn't legally defined by the government, independent verification becomes incredibly important. Two of the most recognized cruelty-free certifications are Leaping Bunny and PETA's Beauty Without Bunnies program. Let's start with Leaping Bunny. Leaping Bunny is run by the Coalition for Consumer Information on Cosmetics. What makes it significant is that it requires brands to commit to a no animal testing policy at every stage of product development, including the finished product, individual ingredients, and the supplier level. Here's the key distinction. Leaping Bunny requires documentation and supplier monitoring. Companies must provide detailed assurances that neither they nor their suppliers conduct animal testing. They also agree to independent audits. An audit means verification. It allows someone outside the company to review compliance. That's very different from simply printing a bunny icon on packaging. Now let's look at PETA's Beauty Without Bunnies. PETA maintains a publicly available list of companies that pledge not to conduct, commission, or pay for animal testing. Brands sign a statement of assurance confirming their policy. The important nuance is that PETA's program relies primarily on company declarations. It does not involve the same level of routine independent audits that Leaping Bunny requires. That doesn't automatically invalidate it, but it is a structural difference. So, what does third-party certification actually confirm? At minimum, it confirms that a company has formally committed to a written no animal testing policy and has provided documentation supporting that claim. In stronger systems, it also includes supplier compliance and monitoring mechanisms. This is the core difference between a self-claim and an audited certification. A self-claim is when a company says, "We are cruelty-free," based on its own internal definition. An audited certification means an external organization reviews the claim, evaluates documentation, and in some cases conducts compliance checks. Think of it like food safety. A restaurant saying our kitchen is clean is not the same as a health department inspection. Independent oversight increases credibility. In a landscape where cruelty-free has no standardized legal meaning, that oversight matters. It doesn't remove all complexity. It doesn't eliminate every gray area, but it adds accountability. Accountability is the bridge between intention and trust. Now, even with certifications, there's still one more ethical layer that makes this conversation more nuanced, and that's the question of parent companies. Now we enter the philosophical layer. Let's say you find a brand that is certified cruelty-free. They don't test on animals. Their suppliers don't test. They meet third-party standards. But then you discover they're owned by a larger parent corporation that conducts animal testing on other brands in its portfolio. So now what? Is that product still cruelty-free? Technically, the subsidiary may operate under a verified no animal testing policy. On paper, it meets the criteria, but financially, profits may flow upward to a parent company participating in markets or practices you don't align with. For some consumers, that's a deal breaker. They choose to support only independently owned, cruelty-free companies so their dollars don't indirectly fund testing elsewhere. For others, the calculation looks different. Some argue that supporting a cruelty-free subsidiary within a large corporation can signal market demand. If those brands outperform others in the portfolio, corporate strategy may shift over time. Purchasing patterns influence business decisions. That's basic market economics. There's also a practical factor. Large corporations often have the research budgets to invest in alternative testing technologies. If internal pressure increases, that investment can scale quickly. So this becomes less of a black and white rule and more of an ethical spectrum. You might ask yourself, am I comfortable supporting a cruelty-free brand regardless of ownership? Or does corporate structure matter to me? What outcome am I trying to influence with my purchasing decisions? There isn't one universally correct answer here. Ethical consumerism is rarely about achieving purity. It's about aligning your choices with your values as consistently as possible within a complex system. The key is awareness. When you understand ownership structures, supply chains, certifications, and regulatory context, you move from reacting to labels to making informed decisions. And that's the through line of this entire conversation. Not guilt, not perfection, clarity. Because once you have clarity, you can build your own ethical framework instead of inheriting someone else's marketing narrative. Now let's make this practical. You're back in that beauty aisle. You have your phone. You have 3 minutes. You don't have time for a regulatory deep dive. Here's a simple framework you can use. Step 1. Look for third-party certification. Do you see a recognized seal like Leaping Bunny or PETA's Beauty Without Bunnies? If yes, that indicates the company has formally committed to a no animal testing policy beyond a vague self-claim. If there's no certification, that doesn't automatically mean animal testing occurs. It just means you need to look more closely. Step 2. Check the brand's website. Go to their FAQ or Our Values page. Search for animal testing. You're looking for specificity. Do they clearly state they do not test finished products or ingredients on animals? Do they monitor supplier verification? Do they prohibit third parties from testing on their behalf? Vague language like "we love animals" is not the same as a policy. Step 3. Check where they sell. Do they operate in markets that historically required animal testing? If so, under which regulatory pathway? Many companies now disclose whether they meet updated international safety documentation standards that allow them to avoid mandatory testing. Here, transparency matters more than perfection. Openly explaining how they comply with global regulations without animal testing is very different from silence. Step 4. Look for a transparency page. Brands committed to ethical practices often dedicate space to outlining their supply chain, certifications, ingredient sourcing, and testing policies. If you have to dig through marketing copy without clear answers, that's information too. Opacity tells its own story. Step 5. Consider parent company ownership. Is the brand independently owned? If not, does that affect your decision? This is where your personal values come into play. There isn't one right answer, but it should be intentional. And here's something important. You don't need to scrutinize every single product in your life. Focus on the categories that matter most to you. Maybe it's skincare. Maybe it's makeup. Maybe it's household cleaners. Progress beats paralysis. The goal isn't to become an investigative journalist every time you buy lotion. The goal is to shift from passive consumer to informed participant. 3 minutes certification, policy clarity, sales regions, transparency, ownership awareness. That's it. Apply that filter consistently, and the fog starts to lift. Once it clears, marketing language loses its grip. Now let's zoom out, because this conversation isn't just about mascara or moisturizer. It's about how systems evolve. When consumers demand cruelty-free products, companies don't simply change labels. They invest in research. They fund alternative testing methods. They collaborate with labs developing in vitro and computational models. Ethical pressure accelerates scientific innovation. That's fascinating when you think about it. Public values can move science forward. There's another layer here. Brands that prioritize cruelty-free certification often overlap with broader sustainability commitments. Not always, but frequently. Transparency in one area tends to correlate with transparency in others. Ingredient sourcing, environmental impact, packaging reduction, supply chain accountability. It's a recognizable pattern. When a company builds verification and documentation systems for animal testing policies, it's already operating with a mindset of traceability. That orientation often carries into other sustainability efforts. From a holistic wellness perspective, this matters. Holistic living isn't only about reducing toxins in your skincare routine. It's about aligning daily habits with the kind of world you want to support. Every purchase sends a signal. One transaction won't transform an industry, but millions of consistent decisions absolutely can. Markets respond to demand. When cruelty-free products outperform conventional ones, companies pay attention. When transparency becomes profitable, more brands adopt it. That's the quiet power of informed consumers. Not outrage, not perfection, consistency. So, when you choose a product with intention, you're not just buying moisturizer, you're participating in a feedback loop between ethics, innovation, and sustainability. And that aligns directly with what holistic living represents: coherence between values and action. So let's bring this back to something steady and simple. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to research every molecule in your moisturizer. You don't need to win every ethical debate. You don't need to overhaul your entire bathroom cabinet overnight. What you need is awareness, because awareness changes how you move through the world. When you understand that cruelty-free isn't a regulated term, you pause. When you know how to check for certification, you feel confident. When you can distinguish transparency from marketing language, you stop guessing. That shift from uncertainty to clarity is empowering. Holistic living has never been about purity. It's about alignment. It's about gradually bringing your habits into closer harmony with your values. That's sustainable change. If this episode brought you clarity, share it with a friend who cares about conscious beauty, ethical consumerism, or sustainable living. These conversations ripple outward. For deeper dives into topics like this, science-backed, thoughtful, and practical, follow me on Substack at substack.com/@greenearthessentials. That's where I share extended reflections, guides, and resources to support your wellness journey beyond the podcast. If you haven't already, leaving a review for Green Earth Essentials helps the show reach more people who are trying to live thoughtfully in a complicated world. We don't change systems through outrage alone. We shift them with informed choices, steady pressure, and consistent alignment. And every time you choose with awareness, you're contributing to that momentum. That's powerful. I'll see you in the next episode. This is Michelle Jackson signing off.